we'd start with Section 21, Section 8 and 21 notices. We're going to be doing things like energy performance certificates, right to rent checks, electrical regulations. Are there any move in, move out guidelines? And sort of we'll close with sort of what if my pet tenant doesn't pay the rent? We've certainly had one or two at the moment, but essentially there are one or two people around. Some were genuine, I think some perhaps not so genuine. So we'll go into the Section 8 and Section 21 notices, and essentially the main difference now is that from 26th of March, when the new laws came in, landlords are required now to give all tenants 3 months notice rather than the usual 2 months for Section 21 and 2 weeks notice for Section 8. So for Section 8, quite a significant difference. And I think obviously what the government trying to do is to stop eviction, certainly giving the tenants sort of at least 3 months security. Along with that, there is a new form which needs to be served, as you probably know, that you have to serve the notice in with a particular form, and the 6A has now been amended, and that will apply until the 30th of September this year. So essentially, any evictions that you need up until 30th September will be 3 months. And that's protecting most tenants in both the private and social housing sector. If after 3 months the tenant hasn't moved, then a landlord does need to apply to the court in order to proceed. Any notices served prior to the 26th of March are unaffected. So if on the 25th of March you served a 2 month notice, that 2 month notice still applies. Interestingly, the government really, what they haven't done is enforce or stop the landlords from actually serving a notice seeking possession, because if you give them, say, 3 months notice from today, you can then seek to get permission after that 3 months has expired. Obviously, most of the evictions is going to be, I would have thought, due to lack of payment of rent, and I think, and we'll cover this later, but with landlords and tenants, are expected to work together to establish an affordable payment plan, because at the end of the day, landlords still want the rent in, and the tenants on the same side are actually responsible for paying that rent. We have had one or two of our tenants come and say, I want a payment holiday. Well, it's not a payment holiday, it's a payment deferment. You're not going to get holidays where you're going to get away with not paying. You are still legally obliged to pay it. As I say, any rent payment really is due and remains legally due. Ground 8, incidentally as well, remains 2 months rent arrears at the time of serving the notice. So if they're 2 months in arrears, you can still serve that notice, but it's a 3 month notice period. Possession orders remain enforceable and unaffected by the Act. So essentially, the thing is that, as I say, after the 3 months, you can give a start notice for proceedings. However, the court proceedings have been suspended. So from the 27th of March, the court service suspended all ongoing housing possession action, which basically means that whilst obviously you could theoretically try and serve an eviction, there's no courts actually in process to do that. They've actually done that for an initial 90 days, but with a lot of this legislation, it's all on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. and that could be extended if necessary. I think it depends on obviously the situation at that time. And neither cases currently or about to go into the system can progress to the stage where someone could be evicted. So essentially, even if you issued proceedings on the 25th of March, that would be in limbo. That would be frozen until certainly for the next 90 days from the 27th of March. With minimum energy efficiency standards, this is really concerning energy performance certificates, EPCs. EPC is a legal requirement before selling or letting a property. You've got to have one, and it must be completed by an accredited assessor using standard assessment procedures. Before the 1st of April this year, any newly let properties were required to have had an EPC rating of higher than an F and a G. So anything F and G were no-go areas. And with effect from this date, this will now cover all existing tenancies, even where there's been no change of tenancy. So you do need to check to see whether your EPC is up to date on your property now and that it is an E or higher. In addition, with landlords assessed at EPC F and G, they must now improve the property rating to E or register an exemption. Now, with the exemption, that's obviously regarding whether if you improve the property, would that actually make the rating any better? But there's obviously more, you can actually get more information on that, and I can send some guidance notes through should you need any. So during the COVID-19, these regulations are not relaxed. You are still responsible for having an energy performance certificate. If you're unsure whether you're fully compliant, you just need to check. If you haven't got an EPC, in fact, over the last 3 or 4 days, the government relaxed the rules whereby an energy assessor can go out and do the EPC, providing the property is vacant. I think the qualifying period for a property being vacant is 3 days. Anything after 3 days, then he would be happy to go around. So are you compliant? I'll just put this on there really as just a reminder to say that just because we're in a crisis situation doesn't mean to say that compliance is going to go away. We still have to be fully compliant. You still have to have everything in place. If you don't, there are some hefty penalties. And whilst I don't think the local authority will be knocking on your door during COVID-19, because obviously they've got bigger issues to hand, and obviously with staff shortages, should any of their staff be in isolation, I can see that they will be when all this finishes. So, and I think we're in lockdown now, so it's a great time to look at that. We can carry out compliant checks where we would come round. We have a compliant checklist and we'd go through that with you. I can't release the form, but if you, and we normally charge £297 plus VAT for that, but during the crisis, we'll be doing it for free. So if you think you need a compliant check, then we can discuss that and just ping me an email at a later stage, and then we can look at that for you. So the next thing on is the Immigration Act, right to rent. There was some doubts, I think is probably about, I can't remember the date now, but it was probably about 6 months ago when the right to rent was actually challenged in court. And the court really did say, with the right to rent, are you discriminating? But nevertheless, that seems to have gone quiet. As landlords, we are still responsible to do right to rent checks when you have a new tenant going in. Now, normally what we would do when we're checking a tenant is we would obviously get some form of photographic ID and something to ensure that they are who they say they are and where they live. Obviously, with lockdown now, you can't do that, but you can ask the tenant to submit a scanned copy and also a photo of their original documents or photo of their original documents, and they can email them or use a mobile app. And then you can check that out by arranging a video call with the tenant, and obviously with their face in the video camera, they hold up the original documents next to the camera, so you can actually check it is actually them. And as a mark of due diligence, always record the date you made the check and mark it as an adjusted check that has been undertaken on whatever date it is due to COVID-19. Just in case the tenant, and there are some very few instances where the tenant doesn't have the right documents, you can or you must actually contact the landlord's checking service if the tenant can't provide these documents from the prescribed lists, and we have prescribed lists as to what is and isn't acceptable. So how long is this on for? Well, basically, these measures will remain in place within 8 weeks of the temporary measures being lifted, and you'll need to. And what will happen is that obviously the government will inform us, and then in turn, if you're one of our managed, if you're managed through us, we'll actually arrange that anyway. But the government will actually advise us of that. And agents within those 8 weeks will need to carry out full retrospective checks on tenants. So it's like doing a proper right to rent check at that time. Just a word of caution that because of COVID-19, some individuals may be unable to evidence their right to rent, and therefore it's vital that you remember the processes that are in place in order to avoid discrimination. Just wanted to put in, obviously with this lockdown, as to regards to virtual viewings, and I added market appraisals in there because the situation with regards to the current lockdown guidelines is that is a viewing or a market appraisal essential or non-essential? Now, I think really the situation is that the government guidelines are there, but they may not help you actually do it. But my personal view is that at the moment, as a company, we're not actually doing face-to-face viewings. Even sort of not. I know there are some agents who are, where they are going to unlock, leaving the door open, stand back, let the tenant go round, and then lock up when they're gone. That's up to the individual company and also the individual landlords, but we are not pushing that because it really, I think, sort of is non-essential unless somebody is homeless, and you've got to prove that they are homeless to do that. So we've actually carried out we did a load of video walkthroughs. We've also now done video X, which is like stitching a load of photographs together. And indeed, I think sort of there are a lot. We did have a tenant who was happy to go ahead on the video walkthrough, and I think sort of we've found that people are actually sort of making a decision on those. Of course, there are some who won't, but if you're geared for that, then there's no reason why you still can't let properties. You've got the right to rent, obviously, sort of with digital documents. We have been asked to do market appraisals on both lettings and sales, and with that, we've done that sort of virtually, so sort of remotely, where we've booked an appointment. We've then sort of asked some various questions, and then with a face-to-face FaceTime or Zoom call, with obviously photographs and hopefully preferably a video, whereby then we've managed to give them a good price, a suitable price for the market, and then sort of listed it with the help of obviously the landlord or seller.